Good morning, Munchkins. Before we get started, a quick word from your sponsor. If our constitutional, that sponsor, by the way, that would be me. So if our constitutional republic is going to survive, it is imperative that conservative Christians learn to articulate the relevance of their beliefs to their children and to other young citizens. So Dad here is on a mission to use evidence-based reasoning and historical evidence to articulate the relevance of Christianity in a secular world and to demonstrate that the American constitutional republic is the best form of government ever devised by man. So Dad releases an article on Substack every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. The articles are both in written and podcast form for your convenience. Please click on the link at the end of the article to receive these articles for free. Your subscribing is very, very helpful to the cause. So now that that's out of the way, let's rap about the Queen of Mean, Margaret Sanger. So about 20 years ago, I was visiting some very good liberal friends of mine. Of course, we wound up in a friendly debate over a glass of Vive le Coq, Le Grand Dame, and Gnocchi and Fusilli. I could barely pronounce that stuff. I still don't know what the heck that is or how to pronounce it. If they were conservatives, this debate would have taken place over a bottle of Rainier beer and some burgers over the grill. Ha! I couldn't help but give you that social commentary. I cracked myself up, but I digress. The debate became more heated, and we began to discuss the subject of abortion. When I informed my antagonist that the founder of Planned Parenthood was Margaret Sanger, and that Miss Sanger founded Planned Parenthood for the express purpose of killing as many black, brown, and inferior white babies as possible, she couldn't believe it. When I informed her of the relationship that Margaret Sanger had with Adolf Hitler, she just about blew a gasket. She told me she didn't believe it, wouldn't believe it, couldn't believe it. Now, what I found most shocking about this debate was that she had never even heard of Margaret Sanger, had no knowledge of the history of Planned Parenthood, and no knowledge of the relationship between Miss Sanger and some of the 20th century's worst mass killers. It is estimated that over 63 million abortions took place as a result of Roe v. Wade between 1973 and 2022. No doubt Planned Parenthood was either directly or indirectly responsible for these abortions. This means that Margaret Sanger must not be excluded from the ranks of the worst mass murderers of the 20th century. Chairman Mao slaughtered about 40 million Chinese during the Great Leap Forward. Hitler slaughtered somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 million Jews. And Stalin took out about 6 million kulaks. Sanger at the very least deserves honorable mention in this macabre pantheon of villains. Now, my antagonist was no rube. This was a highly educated, articulate woman whom I deeply respected. She was simply ignorant of the history of Planned Parenthood and its founder. My instinct tells me that if more liberals knew the history of Planned Parenthood and its founder, they'd be a lot less likely to support that organization. So given all that, I consider it my duty as Dad to provide you with a quick and dirty history lesson on Planned Parenthood and, more to the point, its evil founder, Margaret Sanger. Before launching into stories about Miss Sanger, it seems apropos to take the words directly from the mouth of Miss Sanger. See if you can digest her direct quotes on an empty stomach. So here goes, number one. Quote, "But from my view, I believe there should be no more babies." That was in an interview that she had with John Parsons in 1947. Those were her words. Here's her second quote. "The most merciful thing that the large family does to one of its infant members is to kill it." That was from a quote she had in a book, Woman and the New Race, entitled The Wickedness of Creating Large Families. She wrote that in 1920. Number three, quote, "We don't want the word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population." She wrote that in a letter to Dr. Clarence Gamble in December of 1939. Number four, quote, "I accept an invitation to talk to the women's branch of the Ku Klux Klan. I was escorted to the platform, was introduced, and began to speak. In the end, through simple illustrations, I believe I had accomplished my purpose. A dozen invitations to speak to similar groups were proffered." That's Margaret Sanger. She wrote that in her autobiography, published in 1938. Number five, quote, "I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being practically. Delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just marked when they're born. That to me is the greatest sin that people can commit." And that's in an interview she conducted with Mike Wallace in 1957. Number six, quote, "The most urgent problem today is how to limit and discourage the overfertility of the mentally and physically defective." That's Margaret Sanger. She wrote that in 1921, the book, The Eugenic Value of Birth Control Propaganda. Number seven, A marriage license shall in and of itself give husband and wife only the right to have a common household and not the right to parenthood. That's Margaret Sanger. She wrote that in an article, America Needs a Code for Babies. She wrote that in March of 1934. Number 8, no permit for parenthood shall be valid for more than one birth. That's Margaret Sanger. She wrote that in America Needs a Code for Babies. That was an article published in March of 1934. And finally, quote, organized charity itself is a symptom of a malignant social disease. That's Margaret Sanger. She wrote that in 1922, and the quote was from a magazine article, The Pivot of Civilization. Now, this list could go on for pages. I cut it short, by the way. There's a whole lot more, but I think you get the point. Margaret Sanger was a monster of the first order and deserves to be spoken in the same sentence as Hitler, Mao, and Stalin. While every statement on the list goes above is inhumane, perhaps the worst of the lot is item number 7. In number 7, Ms. Sanger advocates that the government should decide which couples are allowed to have children and which couples are not allowed to have children. Now, let the implications of that sink in for a minute. So the government's supposed to tell you whether you can have a kid or not. The moral depravity it takes to even utter those words is self-evident. While her words are certainly damaging enough, the old adage, action speaks louder than words, still applies. Never fear, Ms. Sanger worked hard to put her principles into effect. Let me provide you with a couple of examples. In 1927, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Buck v. Bell that states could forcibly sterilize women deemed unfit with or without their knowledge. Now, it is universally acclaimed that the worst Supreme Court ruling in American history was the infamous Dred Scott ruling. In Dred Scott, the Supreme Court ruled that since blacks could not be considered citizens, they had no standing to sue in federal court. It is inarguable that that was a horrible ruling. But I submit to you that Buck v. Bell was far worse than Dred Scott. Buck v. Bell legitimized state-enforced sterilization and sanctioned eugenics as state policy. As a direct result of that policy, over 60,000 women were sterilized against their will, or worse, without even knowing it was being done to them. In justifying that crime, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes famously stated, quote unquote, 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. Honestly, you can't make this stuff up. Of course, Ms. Sanger gave this ruling her full-throated endorsement. In the aftermath of Buck versus Bell, thousands of women would go to see their doctors for a procedure that had nothing to do with their reproductive systems. They walk out of the doctor's office infertile. These poor women would go for years not knowing that the physician they trusted to remove their appendix had also removed their uterus. Procedures of this nature were conducted on thousands of black, Indian, and poor white women. It is noteworthy that Buck versus Bell has never been overturned till this day. It's still on the books. It's just that state statutes supporting this heinous law have been repealed. Later, Hitler's propaganda chief Joseph Goebbels implemented Buck versus Bell in Germany to justify euthanizing Germany's human weeds, to use one of Ms. Sanger's descriptions for human, quote-unquote, deplorables. Where have you heard that term, by the way? In 1939, the Reich issued a decree that all nurses and midwives report to the government newborns under the age of 3 who displayed mental or physical deformities to the government. The Reich would then tell the mothers of these infants that a new hospital had been built to assist children with physical and mental health issues. The doctors at these hospitals would then euthanize these children and tell the parents that their child died of pneumonia or some other illness. Now keep in mind that Hitler's Third Reich did that to German children. How evil is that? These were all tactics and strategies endorsed or developed by Ms. Sanger. Hitler's personal physician, Dr. Brandt, declared that Ms. Sanger's methods were ingenious. To underscore just how ingenious Sanger's methods were, during the Nuremberg trials, many Nazis escaped the hangman's noose by using Buck versus Bell as a defense for their actions. The Spartans implemented such strategies in the 5th century BC. King Herod had all babies under the age of 2 slaughtered in the 1st century. Outside the Spartans and King Herod, I can't think of a monster who specifically targeted the young to the degree that Margaret Sanger. But as I say in daytime TV commercials, but wait, there's more. Ms. Sanger was one of the founders of something called the Negro Project. The other founders were leftist black leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois, Marion McLeod Bethune, and Adam Clayton Powell. The stated purpose of this project was to spread awareness of contraception in the South to lower poverty rates. The actual purpose was, well, it's a bit more complicated. Let me riff on that for a minute. From Ms. Sanger's perspective, the real purpose of the Negro Project was to reduce the quote-unquote human weeds represented in this case by American blacks. Pretty straightforward. Her thinking was that by putting black doctors and nurses in charge of birth control clinics, she could raise the level of trust in black women to use these clinics. Once they were in the clinics, black doctors and nurses could do Ms. Sanger's work and remove the reproductive organs of these women without having to fuss around with informed consent. A clever strategy indeed. Now, the question you have to ask yourself is, why would black leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois work with an open eugenicist like Margaret Sanger? At this point, I got to admit to speculation. What follows is not fact, but the result of Dad's inductive reasoning. Here goes. The answer lies in the concept promoted by the founders of the NAACP called the talented tenth. The short version description of the talented tenth is this. The most talented and capable 10% of the black population should lead the other 90% out of poverty. If you think this sounds elitist, then by Jove, I think you've got it. Now you're starting to use your noggin. It is quite natural for elitists like Du Bois and Sanger to find common ground because they both believe at bottom that some humans are more deserving of life than others. Du Bois was a strong advocate for family planning. As a result, he was willing to overlook Sanger's, shall we say, controversial views to further his perceived interests. While Du Bois would disagree with Sanger on the elimination of all blacks, my guess is that he certainly would have no problem with the elimination of some blacks. Say, how about eliminating the bottom 10%? Yikes. To modify Shakespeare's adage, circumstances indeed can make for strange bedfellows. Let's fast forward to present-day America. Ms. Sanger's legacy continues on in the form of over 550 Planned Parenthood clinics located all over the United States. But of course, like any good business, Planned Parenthood locates its abortuaries near its target audience, that is, neighborhoods with a high percentage of black, Hispanic, and poor whites. I would hazard to guess that if you find the obligatory Martin Luther King Boulevard street in any major city, you'll also find a Planned Parenthood clinic within 5 minutes of that street. Hell, in Portland, the Planned Parenthood abortuary is located on Martin Luther King Boulevard, just to make sure you can't miss it. In the abortion business, as in real estate, it's all about location, location, location. To use sales parlance, these neighborhoods provide a target-rich environment for Planned Parenthood. The numbers don't lie. Black women represent 14% of the population, but they're responsible for 37% of the abortions. Black women are 3 times more likely to have an abortion than white women. There is an adage that correlation doesn't prove causation, and while that might be true, I would restate that adage to be correlation that requires investigation. Planned Parenthood currently receives nearly $700 million in taxpayer funding. Planned Parenthood is a $2 billion per year outfit that American taxpayers subsidize to perform eugenics. America defeated Nazi Germany and Adolf Hitler. The Third Reich and his dreams of eugenics got crushed. The KKK was also largely been crushed as an organization. America defeated Communist Soviet Union. We've even seen China reverse its suicidal one-child-only policy from the 70s. Yet here in America, we still not only tolerate the eugenicist legacy of Margaret Sanger, but we fund her weapon of mass destruction called Planned Parenthood. The 20th century was filled with monsters. I used to rank the top 3 as Chairman Mao, Joe Stalin, and Adolf Hitler. The top 3 monster category is dominated by men. But perhaps I've been biased against women. Surely Ms. Sanger deserves placement in the top of the 20th century's ranking of monsters. The data would place her immediately following Mao, but ahead of Stalin. To my mind, she is certainly the worst woman who has ever lived. The queen of mean indeed. Peace out. Ciao.